A stripper known as the Punisher takes the stand in Sean Combs' sex trafficking trial, and he details how he became a key player in Combs and Cassie Ventura's baby oil-soaked freak-offs. I'll tell you what he saw, what he did, and why his relationship with the couple ended, and we'll look at what his testimony could mean to the jury. That name, he said it came from his time playing basketball on West 4th Street in the cages. Hayes said he took part in more than one freak-off with Cassie Ventura and Sean Combs, baby oil and all, and he gave a lot of details. More on those details shortly. Hayes said that Cassie Ventura reached out to him in 2012, but he didn't know the woman on the other end of the line by that name. She actually used the name Janet. Hayes testified, "I was working at a club event. It was either Friday or Saturday." Said, we walked into the hotel suite area. I was expecting a crowd, but there was no guests there. I just stopped in front of a bathroom and just kind of asked, would you like me to change here? And she explained to me that she didn't want me to actually dance. She explained to me that her and her husband liked to create a sexy scene that consisted of me and her mutually applying baby oil, applying it to ourselves and to possibly each other, and to try to create a sexy environment, but they were electronic. All of the furniture was covered in sheets, and there was an area pretty much set up for me to sit and her to sit across from me, and there were little bowls in the area with baby oil in them. Assistant U.S. Attorney Meredith Foster asked, there were what bowls? Hayes responded, yeah, there were bowls of water, and then in the bowls of water there were bottles of baby oil. Then Hayes said a man, Janet's husband, entered the room. Hayes said, what I recall is what I had associated it with. Hayes continued, at points there was a table and a chair on the opposite side of the room, so he sat behind a table and chair, and he kind of paced back and forth, and I noticed that at times he was masturbating. Foster asked, what, if anything, was he saying during the interaction? Hayes responded, he was speaking to Ms. Ventura directly, but it was mostly subtle directions, things like, move the light to the side, maybe positioning her body a certain way. I was trying to be as professional as possible. I know I was there to create what I called a sexy scene, so I declined. I said I was good. As long as they were happy, I was happy. And she said, thank you. And that's that's what we wanted. And I was handed additional monies. Foster asked, and did you count the money you were handed? Hayes said, yes, I didn't count it until after I got dressed. When I got to the elevator, I counted it. It was an additional $1,200. Always gave the instructions about what to do, not Cassie Ventura. And then there was the baby oil. Foster asked, across all these encounters, you mentioned you would use baby oil. Is that right? Hayes said, yes. Foster asked, and how much? Hayes responded, a considerable amount. It was preferred to keep our bodies, covered for, the look of it, to shine or whatever was the preference. Foster asked, and who gave directions about applying baby oil? Hayes said, initially I was told to do it by Ms. Ventura upon starting the scene, like a sexy scene that was enjoyable for her partner. Foster asked, can you explain what you mean by that? Hayes said, it appeared to me at some point that appeared like a fetish type thing. That comment about Combs appearing to have a fetish drew an objection from his attorneys. Hayes continued to answer questions, saying that Cassie Ventura would sometimes wince and sigh at Combs' directions, but she never went against his instructions. Then the questioning turned to drugs and because having sex with a woman in front of her partner was out of the norm for him. He's an exotic dancer. Hayes said there was one time when he couldn't finish the job that he was hired to do, and that was the last time that Combs and Ventura ever called him. Since that time, he's written a book about how he overcame his erectile dysfunction with an implant. And guess what? Combs' attorney, Xavier Donaldson, actually started his cross-examination by congratulating him on his book. You can't really make this. Punisher met Cassie and Combs through his entertainment agency, Hunkamania, as a male dancer, and now he's one of the owners. Hayes is actually coming up on a work anniversary, so Donaldson offers more congratulations. Donaldson said, and you've been doing this for 25 years, correct? Hayes said, I started it in 1995, Labor Day of 1995. Donaldson responded, congratulations, 30 years. Hayes responded, yeah, coming up on a big anniversary. Now, Donna, or anything like that, but it would be a typical check-in. She would always ask, how's business, how's work, that type of banter before any interactions. Donaldson asks, so to set the stages, she would call you, correct? Hayes says, yes. Donaldson asks, you would go to a hotel, correct? Hayes said, yes, that's correct. Donaldson asked, she would let you in, correct? Hayes said, that is correct. Donaldson asked, and you and her would sit down and talk and have late is incorrect. Donaldson asked, at some point after these 8 to 12 meetings, you grew to believe that you were the only person that Cassie was doing this with, correct? Hayes said, that is correct. Donaldson asked, fair to say that you felt special, that you thought you were Cassie's only person, correct? Hayes said, that is correct. Donaldson asked, and you felt special because you had met with her 8 to 12 times, correct? Hayes said, yes, my original arrival, it was a birthday, and this was something special she was doing with her down. You were using your 25 years of experience to make the scene exotic, correct? Hayes responded, I wouldn't. This scene is completely different than anything I did as a male dancer. So whatever I acquired skills in terms of putting on a show didn't really apply in this scenario. This was nuanced that was different than what I had done for my typical work. Donaldson asked, it was nuanced and different because you both were completely naked at this time, correct? Hayes responded, yeah. And also as a male dancer, my focus specifically is different than what you normally do. Hayes said, yes. So the Punisher said he actually thrives on creating a funny, lighthearted environment. So doing something sexual is not something that was normal for him. It was a challenge. Donaldson takes that and changes his angle, leaning into why these interactions were so comfortable, and the Punisher falls right into it. Donaldson asks, let's start there. You didn't get any cues that there was a discomfort with the sexual interaction. Seemed like it was consented as far as I was concerned. Donaldson responded, seemed like it was mutual and she was having a good time and you were having a good time, correct? Hayes said, well, I can only speak for myself, but it seemed like the scenario, I was there to create the scene or whatever, that it was going well. That was my goal. I really looked at it as a job. And in those moments, I would feel I was doing what I was there to do. So we'll stop there because Donaldson's point was made. He gave a visual to the jury that Sean Combs was being Combs paid to sustain, literally. There was another question from Donaldson. He asked, there was an occasion where Cassie called you and you arrived at the hotel and nothing happened, correct? Hayes responded, yes. And when you arrived at the hotel, Cassie opened the door and provided you money, correct? Hayes responded, yes. Donaldson asked, she provided you approximately $500. Hayes said it was $500. Donaldson said, so on that occasion, you actually got paid for doing nothing, correct? Yes, they didn't ask you when you observed Miss Ventura. She never appeared to be intoxicated, correct? Hayes responded, she did not. Donaldson asked, and when you observed Miss Ventura, she never appeared to be under the influence of any drugs, correct? Hayes responded, not that I would recognize, no. Donaldson asked, you wouldn't have sexual intercourse with a woman who you believed to be under the influence of drugs, would you? Hayes said, I would not. Donaldson asked, because that would be bad, right? Meredith Foster is leading the prosecution team in this case. Paul, what are your thoughts, your gut reaction, your first reaction to the testimony of the Punisher?
So my first reaction to it was that I understood in theory why the prosecution wanted to call a witness like this, to kind of really lay out what are called the means and methods of any kind of racketeering conspiracy or organization. They need to put on charge of everything. But on cross, I think Xavier Donaldson did a very, very good job of presenting a compelling case that this was all very consensual activity. I mean, he went so far as to say that if he even felt that Cassie Ventura was uncomfortable with any of the sexual escapades, that he would not have done it. So I think that it wasn't really as useful for the prosecution as they had hoped. And I think the defense did a pretty good job of kind of transforming him almost into a defense.
You know, she was the one handing over the money, with the exception there was one time where Combs threw some money on the bed and said, I like this SH, you know what, how to finish that word. And that was the only time, he threw money down. He gave the directions, but said that Cassie Ventura seemed to be into it or whatever. So you feel the defense benefited more from his testimony than the government?
Yeah, I think it's harmed by claims that she is the one initiating. Now, obviously, people under duress can be coerced into reaching out and doing these things, but the Punisher's testimony certainly gave the defense a real shot in the arm for the argument that Cassie Ventura is an opportunist who is, trying to get something out of this and is kind of really embellishing the extent to which she was not willing to participate in these actions because he had no choice. That's not the story that the Punisher presented.
He said there was no violence, but obviously there's other testimony about violence in this relationship. The defense concedes that there was violence, that Sean Combs is a domestic abuser, that this was a relationship with domestic violence. How do they get over that hump, though? How does the government get over the hump and take this from domestic violence?
By extension, Combs's organization, the RICO organization, to coerce people into doing what the organization wanted them to do, these racketeering acts, one of which is obviously sex trafficking, because that's what's being charged. So they're not claiming that Combs is on trial for domestic violence, but what they are claiming is that the domestic violence is how Combs was able to run his RICO organization, how he was able to enforce his sex trafficking. And in that sense, the domestic violence does become relevant, and it does become
held back eventually because he had problems performing sexually. He was upfront about it. It's kind of interesting to me. He posted on his Instagram story the link to his book before he took the stand. But the defense could try to say this guy's an opportunist too. This case is full of opportunists. I think that we will hear in their closing argument that, hey, once the floodgates were opened with this, everybody came out of the woodwork and wanted to be a part.
They want the jury to believe this guy because this guy says, I never saw any violence. Cassie was always consenting. Cassie's the one who reached out to me. Cassie's the one who paid me. They want the Punisher to be a credible witness. So bringing up the book and kind of showcasing that this guy might have ulterior motives for being here, I don't think is the best cause of action. Now, had the Punisher testified that he witnessed violence and Cassie really seemed uncomfortable or reluctant and Combs was kind of egging her on and almost forcing her, then you might want exceptionally good job with the Punisher on cross.
Yeah, it was a good cross. I agree. Well, we'll see where it goes from here. Thank you so much, Paul Townsend, for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you